Unfortunately, I am running into camera problems yet again, but my screen recording and microphone seem to be fine. So let me very briefly and with digressions go through this slide deck that I normally use in class. I don't want to go through it in too much detail because you're getting that in the other videos, you're getting that in the textbook. But what I can add here is a little bit of context, a little bit of texture to this, some high-end, some high-up concepts. All right, so we're talking about competition and monopoly, which the textbook basically divides along a spectrum from perfect competition at one end to monopoly at the other end. Now, underlying this is sort of this big question of why do we see profits go where they go? So Comcast is a cable company you've probably heard of. They're a very big, very profitable company that has awful customer service. They routinely show up in rankings of America's worst companies. They're just awful. Meanwhile, your grocery store is providing literally absolutely necessary for survival goods, and they're doing a pretty good job of it, and they're making very, very little in terms of profit. So you might be more interested in sort of the practical end of this, which is what can you do to find your most profitable opportunities? So that's the big question. The way the textbook is handling it is trying to build models so that we can wrap our head around the logic of that. And in the standard economic view, what we expect is zero economic profit. The joke is the young economist and the old economist walking down the street. The young economist says, hey, there's a $100 bill on the sidewalk. And the old economist says, no way, someone would have picked it up by now. But of course, that someone is the young economist. What we expect as economists very often is that if there is a profit opportunity, someone will come and take that opportunity as soon as they can. Now, one thing I do want to touch on in these slides is questions about uncertainty. So we've talked a little bit about expected value before. So we're going to see that again in the context of risk. And that'll actually help us to better give you an answer to your practical question. Not so much about what's going to be on the exam, how does the textbook deal with this stuff, what are the things that are easy to test on, but the harder things, which is the market test, going out into the world and finding something to do that generates some profits for you. So let's walk through as a thought experiment, and by all means pause and think about these questions as they come up throughout the video. We're going to think about our question of Carlcoin, and then we're also going to think about the prospect of getting free rent. If you guys are living at home, you are in a position where maybe your parents were nicer than mine were, and they're giving you $0 rent, but is it really free rent? This goes back to just straightforward opportunity cost thinking, and that opportunity cost notion is how we get to this more formal concept of zero economic profit. Right? So profit, it's what you get minus what you gave up. So our two examples here, one is you are starting a business and you have a spare bedroom. For example, I am recording this in my spare bedroom that I am using as an office space. Do I have a free office in this room, or do I need to think more clearly about opportunity cost to see what I'm actually getting out of this space? And then let's say you've got a friend who has some hot new tech startup idea. He wants to create his own cryptocurrency called Carlcoin, but he needs some seed money for him to get off the ground and make you a bunch of money. So we're going to bounce back and forth between these, and then we're going to end up settling more on Carlcoin. But let's look at we're making up some numbers with Carlcoin, so let's get those out of the way. He needs 10 grand, and he's offering to give you a 5% interest rate loan. He offers to pay you back in 1 year the money you lend him plus an extra 500 bucks. So in the first example, the free rent, if we imagine, the example in the slides, if your spare bedroom is in Manhattan, the opportunity cost of using that is that you could be renting that out to someone and probably making a couple $1,000 a month. And if the context doesn't make sense for you to use that office space, so if you work on Wall Street and you've got this spare bedroom, it might make a lot of sense for you to use it as office space. But if your business is way out in Riverhead, well, then it would be ridiculous. In that case, you should definitely be renting out this room, probably renting out this whole apartment you've got, and using that rental income to rent something much cheaper and more convenient closer to where you're working. So for me, in Patchogue, and actually this is a point, here's our first digression, a point of something else that comes up throughout economics. We talked about him a little bit, or we talked about Ronald Coase a little bit. And Coase is known for this idea of transaction costs. So for my example, my bedroom that I am using as an office, for a year, I wasn't really using it as an office. It was kind of storage. And storage is maybe better done at, a storage facility. This bedroom, it is in a very expensive real estate market. There's a college around the corner, so there's probably kids looking for a room to sublet. I could hypothetically rent out this bedroom, but the benefits would be a few $100 maybe. The cost would be hassle, right? There would be transaction costs. I'd have to find a tenant. I'd have to manage the tenant. I'd have to fix stuff for them. I'd have to live with them going through my private space. So all of those other subjective costs are relevant to my situation and might be relevant to your situation if you're thinking about something like this. So maybe you could rent out this spare bedroom, but maybe the transaction cost would be high. And so when we fully account for all the costs and benefits, maybe it is not that you're getting a free office space, but that you're getting a reasonably low cost office space given your alternatives. All right, let's go back to Carlcoin. So an important concept or two concepts we need to distinguish between are accounting profit and economic profit, which I think the textbook is covering. So here's the very short version. Let me try and pick up my pace here. The accounting profit is cash in versus cash out. The economic profit is benefits in versus opportunity costs out. Now, here's the interesting part, adjusting for risk. If Carl tells you he's got a 1 in a million chance that he can't pay you back, let's create a spreadsheet for this. So now we've got a chance of failure, and that is just equal to 1 over 1 million. So that's the probability that he fails. So now we can think about our expected benefit, and then our, let's say, how do we put this? Let's just say, let's call it upside. So the upside of this deal is that Carl, we give up $10,000, but we get back $10,500. And let's just specify that we've got an upfront investment of $10,000. So now our expected benefit is going to be the chance that he fails times 0, right? That's what we get. Actually, let's make an explicit row. Let's call this the downside. And let's make this times this cell. Cool. So the downside is 0. If he fails, we get absolutely nothing. But if he succeeds, we get $10,500. What we need to do is we need to take what is the chance that we fail and what do we get in that case. And then we subtract out, or we add on the other thing that might happen times our upside. So let me explain this little bit of math up here. B3, this is the chance that we fail. 1 minus B3 is the chance that we succeed. So we're simplifying down to two possible outcomes. Either Carl pays you back or he pays you nothing at all. If he pays you nothing at all, there's a 1 in a million chance that happens, plus a 999,999 out of a million chance that you get $10,500 back. So when we do the math, what we get is just a little bit less than 10,500. This is the expected outcome. Strictly speaking, our benefit should be the $500 of interest payment we're getting. Although actually, we should also be counting the opportunity cost. So let's say our opportunity cost is that maybe instead of getting 5% interest, maybe we get, what would this be? This would be 1% interest. Maybe we only get a 0.5% interest. Oh, that's not it. That would be a lot of interest. 0.5% interest, not a whole lot, but let's just say that that's super safe, right? So let's set our opportunity cost to the risk-free alternative. You put your money in a certificate of deposit, super boring investment, but super safe. So then we can ask, what are our profits, which is going to be what we expect to get out of this minus what we could have gotten instead. So if Carl is correct that there's a 1 in a million chance that he fails, then the risk-adjusted profit is we take out the interest we could have earned, and we're left with the economic profit. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. Where did I go here? Our economic profit is what we get when we take this option, when we invest in Carl Coin, minus what we could have had we gone with our next best alternative, which in this case we're assuming is just something super safe. And this is sort of common practice in economic modeling. You think about some investment and you say, how about the alternative is you just buy treasury bonds, something low interest, low risk. So if Carl is correct, here is our economic profit. Oop, that's not what I wanted. If Carl is correct, our economic profit, is this right? Is $450. That's correct. All right, let's see. If I can get that there. All right. So let's set up some alternative scenarios. So here is if Carl, this is Carl's forecast basically. And Carl actually might even be kind of crappy and say, you don't have an alternative way to use your money. What are you going to do? Bury it in a coffee can? But that's Carl being a bad salesman. We'll stick with this opportunity cost in all of our situations. But let's think about what Carl's mom has to say. Carl's mom is a venture capitalist, and she's going to be biased in Carl's favor, but she thinks there's a 5% chance Carl Coin fails and he doesn't pay you back. And that's going to have a big impact on our expected outcome. So at a 5% chance of failure, now our expected benefit is less than the money we put in initially, right? So we put in 10,000 bucks. If we had 20 deals just like this, one of them would fail, and the net result would be that the average outcome would be $25 less than we started with. Compared to the nice safe option, our profit is negative in this case, which would tell us that this is a bad idea. If this 5% figure is reasonable, then we don't want to be investing in Carl Coin. Now, one way that this thinking is relevant to you guys is when you think about how you're going to borrow money in the future. So some things like this are things like, say, a credit card, right? A credit card, you're going to have a really high interest rate. And what that boils down to is you're going to the bank and saying, give me 10,000 bucks so I can buy a whole bunch of cool stuff. And they think, well, what's the chance that you just run off and don't pay us? well, you seem like a nice person, but a lot of people seem like nice people, and on average, 1 in 5 of them has failed to pay us back. So if we're thinking about lending someone $10,000 or giving them $10,000 of credit, they might fail to pay you back, and if they don't pay you back, there's not really anything you can get from them. If I spend 10,000 bucks on a vacation, the bank can't repossess that. So their downside is they lose everything that they gave me up front. If they're going to give me that credit card loan at 5% interest, they're going to be losing money, and eventually they're going to go out of business. So the banks that are going to be left are going to be the ones that charge a high interest rate, that say, we'll give you this money, but there has to be a big upside for us. And that big upside has to be enough that they end up doing better than their next best alternative, which is some safe investment. So in a case like this, what we need to do is charge enough interest that our expected benefit overcomes our expected opportunity cost, right? If you're going to loan someone money for a credit card, you have to charge a high interest rate. Now, what about something like a car? $10,000 car loan, they might be able to repossess the car, right? So maybe their downside is they end up with a car worth 2,000 bucks, right? Probably if you're not paying your car loan, you're not treating your car very well, but now they've got some collateral, right? And in this case, our expected benefit goes way up, because if you don't pay back your loan, the bank gets something in return, right? And given that, we might also expect a lower chance of defaulting on your loan. You bought the car because it gets you to work, right? So you've got an income which allows you to pay this back. And you know that they can take it away from you, right? So now you have this long run interest that you didn't have when you spent 10 grand on an exotic vacation. So let's say your chance of failure goes down. You have some collateral now. So now we don't need to charge this 35% interest. Let's see what happens if we charge $1,000 of interest. In this case, we're effectively charging a relatively low interest rate compared to the credit card, because there is a lower chance of default and there is a lower downside for the bank. And that's why your car loan payment, the car loan interest rate, is lower than you get on your credit card. Even better than that would be if this was money for a mortgage, we might have an even lower chance. Oh, where's my decimal key? We might have an even lower chance of default, and the upside, or rather the downside, if you do foreclose, is going to be that the bank has something worth much more than a used car, right? Or something that's lost a lot less value than a used car. They're going to face transaction costs, right? It's not easy to sell a house, particularly if you're a bank, you're not living there. So there is going to be some loss on this, right? A $300,000 house isn't worth $300,000 to a bank, because they have to go through the effort to get rid of it, and they don't get to live it in the meantime. But all told, the net result is these expected benefits are higher, so now we don't need to charge even as much as we did on the car loan. If we charge half as much, we're still making an economic profit, and so we can afford to charge this lower interest rate because we have more collateral and lower chance of failure, right? So a mortgage interest rate is even lower than for something like a credit card. The other big thing that you're going to see, so actually we should have said that was a credit card that moved to a car loan, and then the car loan became a mortgage, and now the mortgage is going to become a student loan. For a student loan, maybe there is some chance of failure, but here's actually what we have. Let's start with the baseline, right? So if I loan you money to go to school and then you don't graduate, right? Or you get a degree and you go out in the market and you find no one's hiring for that degree. In that case, there's some chance of failure, in which case you're just not able to pay me. Now, let's think about also some chance of failure where you declare bankruptcy, and now the person giving you this student loan, they go to the court and the court says, sorry, they're just not going to pay you, right? You can't even wait until they start earning money, you get nothing. That's what would happen if it was possible to declare bankruptcy and get rid of your student loans. And in a case like that, what we're going to see is that the bank is going to have to charge enough interest to cover their opportunity cost. Ooh, that's too big. 11,500. I'm making up numbers here. We can think about that as like 3.5% interest, which sounds a little bit silly, but I'm making these numbers up off the top of my head, right? So you can play around with this sort of a model and put in some numbers that make a little bit more sense. I'm trying to get just at the big idea here. Now, the world that we do live in, you can't declare bankruptcy and get rid of your student loan. So maybe they have to garnish your wages for the rest of your life, but the downside gets better, right? The downside for the bank. Your downside gets worse, but the net result is the bank is now able to afford to charge lower interest rates, which means it's going to be easier for people to get student loans in the first place, right? So in the case of a student loan, they can't take your degree away from you. They don't have collateral, which is why we have this weird rule in the bankruptcy laws that says you can't get rid of your student loans just because you declared bankruptcy. It feels unfair, it feels weird, but there's some economic logic to it. All right, coming back to Carlcoin. When we look at Carl's offer, we have to account for the alternative, we have some opportunity cost, and we have to account for the risk. And given a relatively high risk, like 5%, we need to charge a higher interest rate to be able to give this loan to Carl, right? We've got other things going on. We've got other responsibilities. We might decide to give Carl this loan even knowing that we're going to be losing money, but if we're doing that, we're really just giving Carl wealth, right? We are essentially being altruistic to Carl, and that's fine too, right? We're essentially subsidizing some part of his risk, and sometimes it makes sense to do that in the world. But if you're thinking, say, from the perspective of a bank, they're not in the business of charity. A bank has to consider, are they going to get paid enough that they can pay their employees and keep the lights on? So let's take the perspective of the bank. We're not going to just be nice and let Carl essentially take $75 worth of wealth from us in expected value terms, right? What's $75 between friends? Not really a big deal, but we're not friends anymore. We're thinking like the banker. So now Carl offers collateral. We're going to ask, what is going to bring our economic profits up enough? So Carl with collateral, which might be spelled like that. It's not. Doesn't matter. This isn't a spelling class. So let's say we're going to take this 5% figure as appropriate. The question now is, how do we bring this expected benefit up to our opportunity cost? Let's just start plugging in some numbers. If we put in 1,000, hey, we're pretty close. 1,500 gets us right there. So if Carl has something that's worth $1,500 to us, right? Specifically $1,500 when we get it in a year. If it's worth, say Carl's crappy used car, it's worth $1,500, or Carl's gaming PC that he put a bunch of money into, that's worth $1,500 if he were to sell it for parts on eBay, right? Something like that. If Carl put up that collateral, now what we hope is Carl just pays us $10,500 in a year. But if he goes out of business, if he doesn't have the money to pay back the loan, if he gives us something that we can get $1,500 from, then our expected benefit, our risk-adjusted benefit from this deal is just enough to overcome our opportunity cost. All right, so that's how much collateral we would need from Carl. Now, back to the point of zero economic profit, if we're in this perspective of we're a bank, well, what if we just asked for $2,000, right? In that case, we're getting $25 profits. What's to stop someone else from doing the same thing? Ooh, it's not it. There we go. So if Carl is in a setting where I am his only source of a loan, I might say, hey, look, you got to put up 5,000 bucks in collateral. And Carl is over optimistic, so I might get Carl to actually sign this contract because he's certain he's going to actually make it big and be able to pay back this loan, no problem. So if I charge, I say I'll give you the loan, but you need $5,000 collateral. If the bank down the street is offering to give him the same loan for $2,500 collateral, it's the same price, but it's different terms and conditions. And the terms and conditions are more favorable at this other bank. So if this other bank wants this expected benefit, this expected profit of $50 more than they want $0, they'll undercut me, and then I miss out on $175 of profit, unless maybe I offer to undercut them and only take $25 of profit. So we've got this competitive pressure where they'll go down to, say, $15.50, just a tiny bit more than zero. And at that point, it's not worth me offering any less, to take any less collateral than that, right? So at basically this competitive pressure where my bank and the bank down the street are both competing to get Carl's loan because we both know that we can make money on this deal, at least on average, right? 1 in 20 times we lose a bunch of money, but we make 20 of these loans and the outcome is pretty good overall. We both want this opportunity and we push down either the price or the terms and conditions until it's no longer worth doing so. Right? So when we have competition here, we go back to this zero economic profit scenario. So first off, what we've seen is why we charge interest for risk and why we have to overcome some opportunity cost, right? The economic profit of this situation doesn't just mean we get 500 bucks benefits because that's the interest we're getting. We have to account for the fact we could have put the money somewhere else, and we've got some chance that Carl fails, right? So either we charge him a higher interest or we take some collateral to make this deal work. I'm going to skip this example. You've seen something very similar in the textbook, but let me give you the big idea here. The difference essentially between an accountant and an economist is that an accountant has two jobs. One is to give you useful information, and the other is to make sure you don't face too much taxes. An accountant is there to protect your money from the government, as well as to help you make good decisions where you think about how well is my business doing? Should I put more money over here? How am I doing over here? Where do I have resources? How could I respond to some change in the market? That's useful information, but an accountant also has to follow specific procedures because otherwise we run into problems with enforcing tax law. But that's something to talk to your accounting professor about. The difference between accounting profit is sort of the technical definition of profit according to the accountant's system of rules that's built to both help them give you useful information and to deal with the tax law. Accounting profit's about that. Economic profit, we're sort of able to take a step back and say, let's just think about costs and benefits. So, all told, we expect when there is competition, there to be pressure for people to pick up that $100 bill off the sidewalk. So maybe the $100 bill is we're offering loans, but we're taking really high interest rates, or we're taking really big pieces of collateral. That means there's a chance for someone to go in and offer better terms or better prices to steal up all that business, right? To the extent we see people wanting profit, they're going to go in and erode profit opportunities, right? It's like if I leave something sugary on my counter overnight, the ants come in and eat up all the sugar. With economic profit, if there's a $100 bill on the sidewalk, people set up businesses to take advantage of that, right? So in the long run, this is what we expect. This is our equilibrium condition that we're driving towards. Zero economic profit, where we're covering our opportunity cost, including our risk, but we're not making more money than is strictly necessary to get us to do a thing, right? People need loans. how much money do we need to get paid in interest to bring that money to market to issue someone a loan? Well, if we are getting paid more than it would take us to actually be willing to give that loan, then we're making economic profit. And if that's the case, we would expect some other bank to come in and undercut us. Competition erodes profit, right? Nice, simple thing. Now, profit also tells us something interesting. So let me take a step back from the economic models that you're seeing in the textbook and give you more of a philosophical view on what economic profit is. Economic profit is telling us that there is some need that is not being met. And let's also take a step back. As we saw on our spreadsheet, it's possible to have negative profits, right? So when we have this downside of 0, we're losing money on average because of the risk. Or if we imagine something like just the case of inflation, he's going to pay us back $10,500, but that money is not going to be worth as much. We'd have to adjust for inflation also, and if we didn't, we would have a negative profit, right? So a loss is just a profit, and we expect losses to go to 0 also, right? We expect this push towards where everyone can expect, some are lucky, some are unlucky, but on average, we expect a consistent level of profit when we adjust for risk and all these other relevant factors. So, what's an economy? What does profit have to do with this? How do you use this knowledge? So an economy is this process of us adjusting our plans, and this is the cool thing about competition and profits. As we compete for profits, we're better coordinating, right? This is the iPencil story. We're getting the appropriate amount of effort going into cutting down cedar trees and replanting. We get the appropriate amount of effort put into building factories to process rubber, right? We are answering the big economic questions through our action in a way that's aggregating a ton of knowledge, and we're doing it in the, maybe not the most efficient way, but we're always pushing towards more efficient ways to do this. So if we see a negative loss like this, buggy whip manufacturers are losing money, right? What this means is buggy whip manufacturers are selling an obsolete technology. Their costs are higher than the benefits they're creating, and therefore it would be an economic waste to keep too many of them in business. There might still be some use for a small number of buggy whip makers for horse racing, but we won't need as many as when everyone drives a horse and buggy instead of an internal combustion engine driven car. Right? So a negative profit tells us to pull resources out of an industry. Or if we see something like old folks' homes are making a ton of money, that might tell us that we need to push resources into an industry. If we see some industry being super profitable, it means we want to move resources in that direction. Now, back to, well, I don't know if we've talked about insurance, but let's talk about insurance really quickly. With risk, you might get lucky, you might get unlucky. When you go play roulette at the casino, you are in a situation of risk. And in risk, you know what the probabilities are. In the market, in real life, we're always much more in the realm of uncertainty, where we don't actually even know the probabilities. So this takes us to another area of competition where we start to think about entrepreneurship. But actually, you know what? Let me stop this recording here. We'll make a new one for that.